My guest today is Professor Vali Nasr. Vali is a professor and a former dean of SAIS, the School for Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University. And I'm going to ask him what he thinks the future of the Middle East might look like in a post-COVID world.
This is a pivotal moment for the world order, and the Middle East reflects that. And in some ways, some of the issues that Middle East was grappling with are going to accelerate, but there are also opportunities and pivot moments as well. One is that the Middle East is going to be operating in a very new global environment post-COVID, and that is the intensification of US-China rivalry. This matters to the Middle East, and they're going to be sort of caught in a new reality where the biggest markets, which are in Asia for oil and energy and trade, are drifting apart from their principal security backer, which is the United States. Secondly, the economic impact of COVID has been tremendous on the Middle East. I mean, you can take a case of a country like Iran, which was already under sanctions, and COVID is kind of like a double tripling of that sanctions in terms of its economic impact. But even the wealthy countries, the oil-rich countries, have been hit by low oil prices. Countries that have tried to divest away from oil by investing in tourism, like Dubai or Egypt or Tunisia, are now seeing no tourists coming in. Now, the Middle East is already a region where you've had a number of fragile states. I'll take the case of Iraq, and you would say these fragile states could basically descend, if you would, into being failed states again. And then you've had varieties of states which are strong. They have strong authoritarian governments. Take Egypt, Algeria, even Saudi Arabia, and you all of a sudden see that the social contract on the basis of which these governments function has also collapsed. So we look at all of this and say the Middle East was already conflictual, was already unstable, is likely to become even more unstable and more conflictual. But there are also, I would say, opportunities here. One is that it's very clear that because of COVID, the United States is going to leave the Middle East much faster than President Obama or President Trump had envisioned. The US really cannot afford the kind of military engagement it had in the region at the levels that it had. Secondly, most countries in the region cannot afford the foreign adventurism they had. Iran in Syria or Iraq or Lebanon, Saudi Arabia in Yemen, UAE in Libya. So you may begin to see some of those conflicts becoming frozen or de-escalated. And also every country in the region is going to be focused on domestic stability, at least in the near term. And that means that they cannot afford necessarily to be pursuing these zero-sum games they've been doing regionally.
In a way, the Middle East is always at a boil, but it seemed to be in a particular boil right before this crisis, whether it was Israel and talk of deals, whether it is Afghanistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, oil price. There was a lot of things happening. What happens to that?
Let's say the Israel-Palestine issue, I don't think it's going to be impacted per se by COVID, largely because Israel is not that deeply impacted economically or strategically by COVID. But on the other hand, the Palestinians may even find Iranians a little bit less capable of supporting them to the extent that they did. But take the case of Afghanistan. The United States is now going to leave much more rapidly than was the case before. If you look at Iraq, you would say the US is not going to give large troop commitments to Iraq. Right now, we're still in the momentum of geostrategy of yesterday. But when the bill for COVID is ultimately tallied in a year's time, the impact of 30 million unemployed in the United States means that the United States is not going to be a big player in the region.
A word, if you will, about society, including demographic trends. Does that become an asset or a liability in a post-COVID environment?
Society so far is an asset at the healthcare level. In other words, COVID, even in Iran where it exploded, has not killed on the scale that it has done in Italy, Spain, or the United States. And that has a lot to do with the demography of the region. A lot of young people, in other words, the segment of the population that's most vulnerable to COVID is fairly small in the region. But economically speaking, the demography is actually a liability. We already saw during the Arab Spring, very young population, a lot of unemployment, with very few prospects for economic growth and improvement of the lot of the people. And at the same time, COVID is disenfranchising the middle class. This is going to generate political anger. And exactly that political anger is why these governments cannot afford to be competing in Libya, Yemen, Syria. And they need to focus on economic ideas and political ideas that create stability at home. And some of them will succeed, but some will fail. We have to expect that some governments in the Middle East will fall, and some of them. So we could look at revolutions, we could look at reform. So we're going to see this sort of thing happening, and all of it has to do is because the society was already unhappy and is going to be even more unhappy going forward.